I'd like to introduce Annalise particularly. Annalise is the Knowledge Translation Manager for the NeuroDevNet NCE. She's got an academic background that includes a PhD in social science from McMaster University, as well as a concurrent diploma in health services and policy research through the Ontario Training Centre. Now, her education has given her lots of opportunity to learn about knowledge translation and to research it. In fact, her PhD research was on knowledge translation within organizations that are positioned where they need to blend academic and non-academic sources of information and stakeholder input and all that sort of stuff, which is very much the kind of environment that we find ourselves in with the NCE in those collaborative environments. So her involvement with the NCEs also includes being a knowledge officer at the Canadian Language and Literacy Network, which was funded up until 2009. So she has lots of experience in finding ways to communicate knowledge with a view to generated action in terms of better practices and policies, and we very much look forward to hearing what she has to say today. Just one other note before I turn it over to Annalise. We are, in Ottawa at least, experiencing some technical problems with our connections and so on. We very much hope that these will not impact the presentation. The teleconference side is working okay, but the computer side isn't. So if we do encounter problems, please bear with us and we'll try to solve those as quickly as we can. With that, Annalise, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hans, and thank you everyone for your interest in this topic. It's definitely my pleasure to be here and share some of the knowledge that I have and things that I've learned along the way. I'd like to start this presentation by just talking a little bit about target audience and goal for your video and some of the things you might want to think about. And then the bulk of the presentation is going to be on actually creating videos and how do you do it. So issues with respect to procuring equipment, things that I think make a video KT, and information from what you guys told me you think makes a video KT. How to craft a KT storyline, things that I've learned from experience doing these videos for the last 2 years for NeuroDevNet, tips on choosing music, where to find it, and where you can get help choosing the right music, and then just some tips for working with researchers. So first, the target audience and goal. So there's a paper by Notley et al., and it's an organization called the Video for Change Network, and they are working on this very issue right now, and it's a working paper, so it's not actually a peer-reviewed paper, but there's very little research evidence on videos for KT, but I'd like to share with you some of the things that I've found when I was searching the literature. So I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of this framework where it says identify the change you're seeking. So what you want to think about before you even go and film is what do you want to change as a result of this video? So at the bottom there are things like policy change, practice change, behavior change, and things like that. So just to sort of have that in your mind before you even go out and film. You want to think about who are the people who can actually act upon the messages of the video. So it's good to have a clear idea of what you want to change, but then you also need to know who are the people who can actually make that change happen. And so when you identify that, that's going to be your target audience. And then what is it that you want them to do or think after watching the video? And then you also want to think about how you're going to reach them. So this is sort of a dissemination question. You can submit your video to a film festival, and there's a paper reference at the bottom with information on how to do that. You can use social media, and a lot of our researchers actually use the videos that we provide to them in their conference presentations as well. So creating videos. this is the equipment that I have and that I've procured for NeuroDevNet. So on the left-hand side, you'll see it looks like a carry-on suitcase, and that's kind of exactly what it is, except it's specific for camera equipment. So you can see there's dividers in it that you can customize to fit your equipment. And I am so glad that I purchased this instead of the backpack option that was also an option, because this equipment can get really heavy, and trust me, when you're running through an airport with your equipment, it's really handy to have a wheeled suitcase. You can see inside the suitcase there on the left-hand side, there's a white rectangle. That's one of the LED lights that I have. I actually have two of those. And then you can see the microphone, and that's a Sennheiser microphone, and then, which always causes interesting problems going through security. And then the camera there is a Canon 70D, and I'll talk a little bit about why I purchased that camera later. And you might not be able to see this, but there's a pocket inside this suitcase that you can put your laptop into, and I bring my laptop all the time with me, as well as external hard drive to dump the footage to. And then you'll see there's tripods there. You want to make sure and get an actual video tripod that can tilt and pan, because then that'll make your shots really smooth. And they're not that expensive. This one I think was $85. And then beside it on the left-hand side is one of the light stands. I actually have two of those because I have two lights. And then behind it, the white triangle is both a reflector for light and also a like a sort of a screen, a light screen. And I'll talk a little bit more later about why that's important to have. And it might look a little bit big to be able to transport with you, but if you can look to the bottom right-hand side of your corner, it actually is very packable, and it packs up to a small round case that I put in the front pocket of the suitcase that has the camera equipment. And then finally, the last piece of equipment that you really don't need to have, it's kind of an extra if you have some extra budget. On the desk there with the red square in the middle, that's called a lateral slider. You can get the same effect with a skateboard if you put the camera on a skateboard and kind of go from left to right and kind of get some foreground in there, and you can do some really kind of fancy shots. But that's really an optional thing. But I recommend getting the best quality equipment that you can afford, and all of this cost me less than $5,000. And you'll find that that's actually really good value when you consider how much videos cost to do if you contract them out to a company. And I also recommend not buying things online. Go into an actual store. I went to Henry's, but there's lots of other really good camera stores out there. Just find one and go and talk to the people and actually handle the equipment. Tell them what it is you're going to be doing with it, because they can help you to pick out the equipment that would be best for your needs. So in our blog that you guys have all seen, the things that I said make a video KT are that the researcher's talking about their research and their impacts. It has the voices of partners and end users. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of videos where we've got children speaking about the impact that the research had on them, and also practitioners, and that's, I think, is so powerful and a key component. I put references on screen where possible just to be able to link back to the research because it is a knowledge translation product. And then overall, you need to have a KT story. So talking about the research and the findings and what the impacts were, or I'll show you an example of another narrative that you can use for the integrated knowledge translation story. But there really is no evidence on this. So this is all coming from what I think. So that's as far as I can see a gap in the knowledge translation literature, is that there really isn't a lot or anything really on videos for knowledge translation. So what was really interesting was to see the responses from the pre-webinar needs assessment. So thank you all for filling that out. I was pleased to see that most of you, all of you, thought that a KT video needed to have an overall narrative that was knowledge translation. I was actually really surprised and interested to see that the references on screen was actually only chosen by 1% out of everyone who filled out the needs assessment. So that's really interesting to me, and it points to the need for more research in this area. So in terms of crafting the storyline, you really have two options. You can either script and storyboard, or you can do what I do, which I personally think is better for knowledge translation videos, which is to interview people, get them to tell you the story, ask them questions, and sort of um, get those gems from them, and then edit it later. And what I find is that, they know their stuff better than you do, and especially when you're interviewing children, they're so honest, and they say things that surprise you. I would never presume to be able to script anything that would even be close to as good as what they can say to you. And you'll see in the examples that I show you, especially the children come up with some really important things that they have to say about what their experiences were. So it's a lot more genuine to do it this way. And from my experiences, the researchers are really good at talking on camera. I haven't had one researcher yet who couldn't talk to their research on camera. They're very good at explaining things, and they're very patient if you ask some probing questions and ask them to explain further if there's something you don't understand, which you should do, because then you have that on your footage. So I want to show you two examples of the storyline. So this first one is a storyline that's it's like an end of grant knowledge translation story. So that you guys might be familiar with the two sort of main types of knowledge translation. The first type is end of grant. So that's you do the research, you get findings, and then you get those findings out there. The second kind of knowledge translation is integrated knowledge translation, where you inform your research approach and your questions by the input that you get from stakeholders. So this first one is an end of grant storyline. So you want to start with what was the problem, or what was the question that you were investigating, or the opportunity. So in this case, for the Caribbean Quest software that was developed by these researchers, they wanted to improve the cognitive functions for children who were in elementary school. And then the solution is the software, and this not only is talked about at the beginning, but also all the way through the video. And it doesn't have to be at the beginning, but it just kind of, for this video, it made sense to put it right after the problem statement. And then you also want to get some footage, some B-roll, or some other kind of appropriate footage to be able to show while you're telling, so that while the researcher is talking about the narrative, the story about the research and the impact, you want to have some appropriate B-roll. So in this case, I asked the researchers to give me access to the software that was the subject of their research study, and they did. And so then what I did was I actually did some screen grabs. I recorded myself playing the game, and so when you see the footage in the video of the game being played, that's actually me playing the game. But I tried to do it so that it made sense to what was being talked about in the video. So at one point, the child is talking, or the educational assistant is talking about the child being able to reach 5 items. And so I made sure that there was 5 items on the screen, so that it makes sense. So just be aware of using B-roll that makes sense to the story that's being talked about at the time. I've seen videos before where people use B-roll of, they're talking about a study that involved, children getting MRIs, and then they show people, walking on a beach. Well, that doesn't really make any sense. So, and it'll be weird for your viewers to see that. So just kind of think about, like, okay, what's being talked about, and then how can I show that? Because that's the power of video, is being able to show. Whereas other formats like written documents and things, you don't have that as much power to do that. So. And then it's really important to give a voice to the lived experience. So this is an educational assistant and one of the children who participated in the study. And the researchers were telling me the story about how this young fellow had made some really good gains in school. But I wanted to talk to the child, because hearing from the child, there's nothing like hearing a child's voice and the genuineness of a child telling you what their experience was. It's just so much more powerful. So I really think it's really important to give a voice to the lived experience and the end users and the participants. So I want to show you this video now, and I'd like to invite you to look for the elements that I just described, and just see if you can identify those.
Pirates of the Caribbean Quest.
So the game is quite attractive to children.
I like everything from Caribbean Quest.
The underlying principle of the game is that children do tasks that are difficult for them to do.
No.
In our studies so far, children really like the CQ. They like playing it, and even though sometimes it's hard, they still want to do it.
Yes.
But the underlying theory of what we're doing in having kids practice on things that are hard is basically a bit about neuroplasticity, or how we develop brain mechanisms or brain systems. It uses the idea that neurons that fire together wire together. So when we are able to perform a cognitive function, the brain systems that support forming that are all firing. And after repeated trials of that, we begin to gain that skill.
So you got to collect the items you see in order. Keeping those things in his brain more than one item at a time was very, very beneficial. He started off, he could only keep 2 things in, and 4 in a row.
So if they can't get past being able to remember 3 items because they don't have any ways of thinking about how to do it, they're not really making that connection that it's harder to get those neurons firing together.
Let's see if he's going to get 5. And yes! 5!
So if they can have some assistance in terms of, okay, what's the way you might try?
Okay, take your time. Boat, bottle,
fish, paddle. I don't know how to.
Okay, remember you have to look at the fish at the beginning.
And then having the child learn how to monitor and look at their performance. And one of the difficulties that a lot of children with FASD and ASD have is in that sort of self-monitoring. What am I doing? How am I trying to do this?
Yeah, what was nice about it too is the paperwork. You could actually see the improvement. You got them all.
I got 67. Good.
And then all of a sudden they begin to use those skills on their own.
They've talked about students not having had those skills before, and then bringing them into the classroom and applying them and actually talking themselves through the strategy.
Well, I think she actually was much more focused on her classroom work after.
When you learned how to read those numbers, did that help you in math?
Yes.
These types of interventions can be delivered as part of a school program. A child can work on this type of an intervention within their school day.
I told you it was easy.
So I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'll refer to that video in a little bit in some of the future slides. But now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about integrated knowledge translation. So one of the researchers that we fund partially is Dr. Jonathan Weiss's chair in autism treatment and care. And so he is very good at doing these stakeholder consultations for being able to listen to stakeholders and inform his research using their input. So he invited me to attend his stakeholder consultation, and I was able to get footage and then also interview him. And so the purpose of, you want to talk about, again, at the beginning, what's the problem or the opportunity. And in his case, I put in information about the mandate of the chair. So studying the ways of addressing mental health in people with ASD. And he does this by studying different interventions that can be delivered for folks with ASD. And so, again, you want to show while they're telling. So while Jonathan in the video is telling the story about how he used the stakeholder input to change his approach, I'm actually showing someone at the consultation who's giving him feedback. So this relates again to what I was saying earlier about having meaningful B-roll during the video. And then it was really interesting because this man with the poppy here, he's a federal MP. His name is Mike Lake, and he also is a parent. He's got a son who has autism. And so he agreed to also be interviewed for the purpose of this video. And what's really neat is that he talked about the importance of being there as both a parent and as a policymaker to be able to hear what has been done since the last consultation, but then also have input, you know, according to what the needs are for him as a policymaker. And again, giving the voice to the lived experience. This is a father and son who attended the consultation, and they also agreed to be interviewed, and they talked about the importance of being able to have that interaction with the researchers and policymakers and have input into where the research is going. So I want to show you this video, and if you had trouble with the audio on the last video, please turn up the volume on your computer speakers, and that may help you to see this video. So this is less than 3 minutes.
And I think there are too many questions.
Part of the goal that we have using this chair is to bring people together for a conversation about research and ASD.
Inside this room today, for example, there are people from every walk of life from all across this country.
We have phenomenal stakeholders within the autism community. There's a dynamic when they get together that really strengthens what we're working on.
It's all about the stakeholders, and Jonathan makes that very clear.
When we first sat down to have a stakeholder meeting, I had all of these great ideas about the different interventions I wanted to develop and provide and study. And the community stakeholders let me know that there's a tremendous amount of excellent interventions that are already happening in our communities. And their message to me was, study what already exists.
Well, it just helps to make sure that as each of us puts effort into making life better for people with autism, that we're moving in a direction consistent with what families need and what the research is showing. We want everything to be evidence-based.
We want our research to resonate with people with ASD and their families.
The important thing for me as a parent of 2 kids on the spectrum is to help have a voice in where the research goes.
It could be fairly dramatic in terms of how at least I think of things and maybe how it gets instituted across NeuroDevNet.
Decision makers and governments to be able to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, to inform better policies to support people with ASD.
To be able to get together like this and sort of share what each other's working on, where we're seeing successes, where we see gaps, is really an important piece of the puzzle.
To put another piece of that puzzle into the puzzle board and connect it with everything else, because it's all about connecting.
It takes a community and a large community of Canadians, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
His stakeholders are across Canada, and I think that's the power that Jonathan can have.
So things that I've learned from experience is I do a lot of filming. I take advantage of opportunities when they arise to sort of minimize costs. So what I do is I do a lot of the filming when I'm at conferences. So I'll ask people while they're at the conference, let's make a time to meet and go somewhere and I'll interview you. But what happens is the first video that I did at a conference, I forgot to ask people to remove their name badges. And if you're going to, so I recommend asking people to remove their name badges at the beginning, but if you forget and you're halfway through filming them and interviewing them, and then you ask them to remove their name badge, I recommend going back and redoing the first part of the interview without their name badge, because if you have footage of them with a name badge and then all of a sudden they don't have their name badge, that's something called consistency, and you want to make sure to that people will notice. Your viewer of your video will notice that, oh, they had a name badge here and now they don't. So just in terms of that, it just gives it that little extra professional edge. And then on consistency too, sometimes there will be things that you never would think of, like in Jonathan Weiss's video, when you have a chance to go back and rewatch it, watch the computer screen behind him in his office, because what ended up happening was his computer screen was on, and it had a nice graph on it, which I thought looked very, evidence-based, and I encouraged him to keep that on, and then all of a sudden the screen went to sleep halfway through the interview, and I didn't want to interrupt him and tell him to stop talking, so I just let him talk, and then, but what happened is not only is that inconsistency in the background, it also affected the lighting level in the room. So you just want to sort of be mindful of things like that. And, things will happen, and you'll also learn from experience as well. Other things in the background, you want to just make sure everything's consistent, so don't change things in the background halfway through your filming. Lighting, of course, you don't want to change that halfway through because that'll be inconsistent. You'll be able to tell from the beginning to the end when the lighting changed. And then just make sure that you tell people to turn off their phone. It's not good enough to have it on vibrate because the microphone will pick that up. It will pick up the sound of the vibration on the phone. So either on silent or off. And things like in the Caribbean Quest video, when the child was playing the game on the laptop, one of the I didn't even think to turn the sound off on the laptop. And then when I got back to the office and I was editing, I had to actually, I don't know if you noticed this, but I had to reduce the volume of the music bed that I had for the video when the child was playing the game, because the two different songs were competing with each other. It was really difficult to watch. So, I mean, that was a good workaround. But in a perfect world, I would have been mindful of that when I was there doing the filming. I would have just muted the laptop. And then take a lot more footage than you think you'll need. For the Caribbean Quest video, I think I had at least 8 hours of footage, and it's okay. It's better to have more than less, because you can always not use, you don't have to use all of it, but if you don't have it, you can't get it later, especially if you're filming off-site and at a conference. So get lots of B-roll and meaningful B-roll. So if you had been able to watch the Jonathan Weiss video straight through, you would have seen at the end when he talks about listening to stakeholders and incorporating their feedback into what his research goals were. I actually had footage of someone filling out an evaluation form. So I actually walked up behind someone and took footage of them filling out the evaluation form. And then I also had footage of people saying goodbye to Jonathan at the end and kind of shaking his hand and everything. And that actually made a really good ending to the video. My other piece of advice is to keep the camera rolling after the interview and keep the camera rolling after the event. So you might be tempted, oh, the event's over, I'm going to pack everything up. That's when you want to still keep your camera out, because you'll get some of that good B-roll that you can use. And for example, at the end of the Caribbean Quest video, when Austin said, well, that was easy. I mean, that was the perfect ending to the video, and that was so spontaneous. We had just finished the interview, and he stood up from the table and said that, and it was such a gift. So I encourage you to keep the camera rolling. You're going to probably encounter, well, I guarantee you're going to encounter some tricky lighting and sound situations. So this is an example of when we were at our annual Brain Development Conference in 2014. I did some filming of the trainees and asked them what their experiences were with NeuroDevNet as a trainee and things like that. And I had asked ahead of time for a quiet room. And they gave me a quiet room, but when I went to the room, it was just this plain brown, not interesting room to film in. And I was filming quite a few people, and I thought, this just isn't going to work visually. So I went and I scouted for another location. And so I also recommend getting people's cell phone numbers, because then you can text them where you are, because if you have to change the location like I did. So anyways, this poor girl on the left-hand side has these shadows on her face just because it was the time of day and there were very limited spaces to film. It was a beautiful space, and at that time I didn't have what I showed you earlier, that the light, the filter, that big triangle, the big white triangle. I didn't have that at that time, but after this experience I went and bought one, and they're not that expensive at all. So if I had had one at the time, I could have had an assistant stand and hold this out of the frame and sort of filter the sunlight so that she didn't have such dark shadows. And then Doug on the bottom right-hand side, you can see his lighting's okay. He was actually in the shade, and I used the shadow highlight option sort of effect in Adobe Premiere Pro, which is what I use for editing. To sort of correct some of the lighting issues. So he ended up being okay for lighting issues, but you can see he's sitting by water. And actually out of the frame on the right-hand side is a really noisy waterfall. But this is where it comes in handy to have a really, really good microphone, because the microphone was still able to pick up very clear voice when he was talking into the camera. So that's a benefit of having a really, really good microphone. And actually audio quality is actually more important than video quality when it comes to videos. People are more likely to keep watching your video if it's got good audio quality than if it's than if the video quality isn't that great. So one of the things I've also learned is have lots of extra batteries. So on the right-hand side with the red lights here, you can see like that's actually one of the units for one of the lights that I have. So those 2 batteries go in one of the lighting units. And actually I'm going to buy some extra ones now, because when I was doing the Caribbean Quest video, I went from one interview straight to the next. I had no time in between to charge up the batteries, and I didn't know that the lights wouldn't last as long as they did. So I was interviewing the researchers in their office after, and it was at the end of the day, and the sun had gone down outside, and they had the lights on in the office, but it wasn't enough. And one after the other, my 2 lights died. And so it was very challenging, but I mean, fortunately, I was able to get most of the interview done before they died, but that was enough of an impetus for me to look into getting some extra batteries for the lights. And there's really nothing you can do about that, because you have to go with what people's schedules are. So that's why I just went with when they were available. So having extra batteries is a good solution. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the unit that says Canon. Those are the camera batteries. So the camera comes with 1 battery and a charger. And then I bought an extra one, but actually I've bought 2 more since then, because I was actually at an event and both the batteries died, and I still had 1 more interview to go. So you don't want to have to tell people, oh, can you wait half an hour while my battery charges up? So I actually have 4 camera batteries. And then the AA battery is for the microphone, and I recommend having a few extra of those as well. And then have plenty of SD cards. You can't believe how much footage you're going to take, and because the footage, if you have the kind of camera that I have, if you have a DSLR camera, it's going to be very high quality footage, so it'll take up a lot of memory. So you want to have a lot of extra SD cards. I have about 5. You only see 3 in the picture here, but I have about 5. And then on the left-hand side is my 3 terabyte external hard drive that I take with me everywhere as well. So I've got my laptop and this external hard drive. You can probably get away with a 1 terabyte if you don't have a 3 terabyte, but if you can use a 3 terabyte, it's really good to have that space to be able to dump your footage from your SD cards to an external drive, you know, especially if you're away at a conference and you've got several interviews that you want to do. And then this is the camera that I bought. And the reason why I bought the Canon 70D as opposed to the Canon T5i is because the Canon T5i is an excellent camera, but this one cost just a little bit more money. But the reason why I bought it is because it has a special processor in it that helps filming in low light conditions. So when you're at conferences and things like that, a lot of these hotels have very low, you'd be surprised how low the lighting is. And so I needed to have that extra feature. And I've found that it works really well. And then you want to make yourself a checklist, and this will be a personalized checklist from your own experience and stuff, but just sort of the basic things like, you know, you might think it's really common sense and basic to say, you know, put the sock on the microphone, you know, like, but or you know, or any of the other steps, you know, like turn it from autofocus to manual focus, or whatever whatever the things are that you need to remind yourself. But you'd be surprised, because when you're focused on interviewing the person, or if you're at an event or whatever, you're going to be so busy and you're going to have so many other things on your mind that you have to juggle. And even though you've done this before, probably, you still might forget some things, and I actually have forgotten some things. So, so if you just make yourself a little checklist, there's nothing wrong with that, and I actually encourage that. Now, this is a separate audio recorder, and it's good to have one of these because just in case something happens with your microphone, if the battery dies or you forget to turn the microphone on, that'll be on your checklist to turn the microphone on, but just in case something happens, maybe the microphone starts to malfunction, you'll still have a separate audio recording. And this is actually an industry standard. This is the Zoom H4n. They're now into the Zoom H5n and H6n, which with each iteration, the microphones get slightly better, but for the purpose of recording voice, it's really negligible. The reason why I prefer the H4n is because the functionality of it is a lot simpler. The newer models have a lot more bells and whistles, and I know how to use this one, so I just use this one, and all you need to do is you just need to have 2 AA batteries and an SD card to put in it. And I usually rent these from Long & McQuaid, which is a company it's a cross-Canada company. It's a chain, and it only costs $29 for a week to rent it. And it's you can also purchase it. It's about $300, but I haven't purchased one. I just rent it when I need it. And then again, on the topic of showing while telling, when I first started with NeuroDevNet, I heard about this exergame technology that one of the researchers had developed, but I couldn't picture what it was. And so this is actually one of the first KT videos that I did, and it was really opportunistic. So taking advantage of those opportunities that you have to film. So we, in conjunction with our annual brain conference, it was World CP Day. And so what they did was they did a demonstration of the exergame. So there's Colin here in Vancouver, and I did that filming in person. And then Wesley in the top left-hand corner, he was in Toronto, and CTV actually took that footage. And so I asked them, actually Blue Review hooked me up with CTV to get that footage, and then I was able to combine it into a video and show what the technology was and show it in action. So when you're choosing music, it's so important to choose the right music track. Some people choose, if they're doing like a series of videos, they want to have the same music track. I personally prefer to have different music bed for each video because it depends on what the message is, and sort of, I don't know, if you watch our videos, you'll see that there's a different music track for each, and it depends on what the story is that you're telling. And you can still sort of get consistency and branding with a logo at the beginning. So you'll see all of our videos start with the same stinger and logo at the beginning, and then it gets into the video and there's a different music track. So Killer Tracks has been around for a long time, and they have a lot of music to choose from. If you don't know where to start and you don't have any sort of confidence in your ability to choose the right song, they have a service where they will actually help you to choose the song. And you can set up an account with them, and what they do is they provide you a login and password, and you can actually have access to up to 50 song downloads. So you can actually download a song for free and try it with your video first and see if it works. And then if that doesn't work, you can try another one. And then whichever one you decide works, then that's the one you purchase the license for. And the license is just under $200 for one song, so it's pretty reasonable. Another one you can try is Smart Sound. I've used songs from them before as well. The stinger at the beginning of all of our videos, the song for that came from this website. And I've also used some free music beds, which is available at this website. And then sound effects. You may or may not need sound effects, but for me, I used again, the stinger at the beginning of our videos where it has the music and then the swoosh sound. The swoosh came from this website. So in terms of working with researchers, I recommend working around their schedule. I don't know sort of what experience you've had working with researchers before, but they're extremely busy and extremely like stretched for time. So whenever they're available, that's when I go. And then if you want to work with some of the end users, like in the case of the Caribbean Quest video where I interviewed the educational assistant and the child, work with the researchers. Don't go directly to the school yourself. The researcher has the relationship with these folks already, and they can more easily go to the schools and go to the parents and things like that and get consent beforehand. And then also make sure that you leave a lot of time to do this. We started to plan for all of this for the Caribbean Quest video in November, December, and it took until February, March to get all of the consents from the parents for their child's involvement, from the EAs, from the schools and the school boards, and it takes a long time, so you just have to leave yourself a lot of time to plan. And then while you're there, I recommend asking the researchers for references. After you're done interviewing them, ask them if they have any references they can send you that relate to what they're talking about. And a lot of times they'll tell you, oh, this paper's been submitted or it's been accepted, but it's not published yet. But I would ask them for the information anyways, because by the time you've had time to actually edit the video, the paper might be actually published by then, and then you can put that reference on screen. But I've even put the reference on screen saying that it's been submitted, and then if people view it a year from now and the paper's been published, they can still search for it with the title of the paper and the journal name, and then they can still find that reference even without the rest of the information. And then what I usually do is I tell people, whoever has participated in the research or in the video, the researchers, the end users, the children, the EAs, I always tell them, I will let you see a draft of this video before it goes public. And that usually puts people at ease, and that can actually help you to get people to consent to participate, because that sort of gives them a sense of control, like you're letting them see it and give feedback before you make it public. And then it usually takes about 2 to 5 drafts before the video is final. There's always little changes to make. So that's just something to keep in mind. These are the questions that I usually ask the researchers when I'm interviewing them. I'm not very strict on sticking to these exact questions, but this is generally what I ask people. So you can use these as a general guide, but then also kind of go with the flow and ask some probing questions if they say something really interesting. And so what I recommend is, if you're not, you guys, I'm sure, as communicators, are really good at interviewing people, but just in case you're not comfortable interviewing people or you haven't had any experience, what I recommend is making good friends with any qualitative researchers in your network, because they're really good at, they're very skilled at making open-ended questions. So what I mean by that is, in contrast, if you ask a closed-ended question, an example of a closed-ended question is, did your research have impact? Well, that's a yes-no question. So you're going to get a yes-no answer, and that's not a very good interview. What you want to do is you want to get them talking more than you. So the researcher, whoever you're interviewing on camera, should be doing 95% of the talking. So the way that you do that is asking open-ended questions. So a way to ask that same thing in a different way, in an open-ended way, is tell me a story about how your research achieved impact. So that's just a little tip for that. Now, the ideal length for a video is under 3 minutes. Our extra game video was the first one that we produced, and it was a little over 4 minutes. So we're getting better at getting to the 3-minute mark. Jonathan Weiss's video was 3 minutes and 10 seconds, and the Caribbean Quest video was 2.5 minutes. So we're getting better at getting to that ideal length. And then when television first started in the 1950s, the attention span of people was about 27 seconds. So people could actually watch a talking head for 27 seconds before getting bored or losing interest. Now it's 9 seconds, but I would actually argue that it's even less than that. So you want to have something change every 9 seconds or less. And what I mean by that is talking head, then some B-roll. That's the change. Or you're looking at something and the camera pans across the audience or tilts in some way, or zoom in, zoom out, or something like that. But something has to change every 9 seconds or less to keep people's attention. So in terms of dissemination, you can embed it on a website, or your partners can embed it on their website. You can use tags as well to so people can find it when they're searching. And then, like I said before, the researchers usually use them in conference presentations, but you can actually be strategic and use them in for trying to get potential partners. You can show them what the technology is and show them what a difference that it's made for children. I think video is a very powerful way to do that. And then you can also, like I mentioned before, you can promote it using social media or film festivals or any other ways that you may be able to think of. So why should you care about this? Well, videos are really gaining in popularity. The blog post that you guys saw, I was actually blown away by the stats that on this blog post. You can see here that that particular blog post got over 6,300 views, and the next most popular blog post on infographics was 537, so it's quite a jump. So it just shows you the amount of interest that there is in videos for KT. So in terms of the cost of doing videography, it takes a lot of time. So I mentioned before about booking the times to film it and getting consent and approvals. That takes it takes time. But fortunately, you can work with the researchers, and they will likely do a lot of that legwork. And then, of course, the filming time depends on how many interviews you've booked. Editing is going to take the most of your time. It takes between 40 and 50 hours. By the time you do all those drafts and all of the, the polishing and the post-production that you need to do, it'll take you between 40 and 50 hours for one video. And like I said, you can obtain quite a bit of film, which means that you have to go through it all when you are editing. But the good thing is if you're the videographer and the editor, as the videographer, you'll know in your mind sort of where those gems are, and you can kind of save time when you're editing because you can skip right to that. You can go, oh, I remember that person saying that, and I want to use that piece, and you kind of know where things are in the video, so it's not like you're coming in fresh to the footage and have to watch it all. And then in terms of the financial costs of it, if you decide to hire a company, it'll cost you $5,000. $5,000 to hire a company will get you a narrated video, so you have to provide them with a script, and they'll give you, for visual, it'll be like, some still photos. That's what you get for $5,000. You don't get very much. And then if you want something that's an interview or something like the Caribbean Quest video would be around $25,000 to $50,000 for doing the interviews, the editing, and the post-production. So they can be quite costly. So this is a really good case for doing them yourself. If you can purchase the equipment for $5,000 and keep producing videos, I mean, it's a very cost-effective way to do it. So you can purchase or you can rent the equipment. I recommend purchasing it because then you can get to know the equipment. And there's not going to be any surprises with something not working because the last person who rented it didn't take care of it properly or whatever. But I recommend purchasing it because then you can read the manual, you can get to know the equipment, and then you know how to use it when you get there. And it's also it's kind of more cost effective that way too, I think. If you really have no budget, you can use your cell phone camera. Cell phone cameras are really actually pretty good these days. The only thing is you got to keep in mind you may not have the functionality that you do with a DSLR camera like the Canon 70D or the T5i because you might not be able to zoom in and out in the way that you can with a DSLR camera and other kind of features, and the audio quality may not be very good, so you may need to rent an H4n to get the audio quality, the separate audio track that you can then use when you're editing. And then it costs about $500 to take a college course in filming. I took the Introduction to Video Production course at Red River College in Winnipeg, but I'm sure that there are lots of other college-level courses that you can take to give you these a good basic understanding and skill level. And then the more advanced techniques I learned by just going on YouTube. Like, it's amazing the amount of information you can find on Adobe Premiere Pro and specialist sort of editing techniques and post-production techniques. So what are the benefits of videography? Well, the videos provide cognitive information as well as emotional information, and that's what makes them so much more powerful than the written word, like a lay summary or something like that. So it's as a result of that, it's a more important, becoming more and more important for academics as a KT tool. So, but in terms of ethics, you can actually, with editing and the music you choose and everything, you can evoke certain emotions and be persuasive. So you have to make sure that you're clear on what the message is that you want to get across, and make sure that that is the accurate message that you want to portray. And that's another reason why I go back to the researchers and to the participants to make sure that I've got the story right. And then in terms of the future, the KT Core is producing a guide on how to do videos for KT. And we're also going to be evaluating our KT products, including our videos. But if you can't wait for the video production guide to come out from the KT Core, you can check out this book. It comes highly rated as the Bible for filmmaking. It's available on Amazon, and the reviews are quite good. It gets 5 out of 5 stars. I haven't read it myself, but it looks like a really good resource. And then this, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, is a reference to one of the papers that I've actually referenced throughout this presentation. And there's actually some really practical tips for researchers who are creating videos. So you may want to check that out and see if that's of any use to you, and that's available online. And now I'll take any questions if anybody has any questions.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, you could feel free to unmute your phone and ask your question verbally, or type it in the chat line. Actually, maybe we'll start with a question that was asked earlier in the chat from Annie Webb, and Fiona actually echoed the same question. Annalise, that was to put you on the spot and to see if you might be able to talk about the distinction between what's a KT video versus a video that has the goal of outreach, public relations, that sort of stuff. We had a brief conversation about that earlier, and I know it's not the easiest question to answer. It's not always cut and dry, but over to you for that.
Sure. Well, and I'll try to answer in as concisely as possible, but I think in general, whenever you're thinking about any kind of KT product, you have to think about the link back to the research. So if it doesn't link back to the research, it's not a KT video. In terms of outreach, I mean, our KT videos are actually good for doing outreach, right? So one of the videos that we produced was about a play about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And the promotional video for that play has actually been used like over 500 or 600 times by the person who created the play to promote the video, so that he does outreach with schools and things like that using that video. So it can be a tool for outreach as well. What I can do is I can make a link available afterwards, and maybe you can send it out, Hans, with the rest of the materials on a conversation about communications versus KT that happened on LinkedIn. Because I think this is a sort of a really big, broader issue, and it's a lot to get into with only 5 minutes left. So,
exactly.
I'll send you. I'll be happy to send that to you. But I guess that's my short answer. Is as long as it links back to the research, you can consider it KT.
Okay. And we got a couple of more technical questions from BioCanRx. In terms of the microphones, Annalise, do you use lapel mics or just the shotgun?
That's a good question. So I decided against purchasing lapel mics, and the reason is that they're very expensive. It costs $800 for one, and if you drop it on the floor, it's broken. So so there's that, and then there's also, if you have more than one person, if you run out of lapel mics, there's all those kind of issues, right? So I decided, for cost reasons and for convenience reasons and practical reasons, that I use the shotgun mic, and that's worked really well. But if you do get in a situation where you feel like a lapel mic would work better, you can always rent them, and that's what I plan to do if I ever feel the need to use that.
Okay. Have you ever had a data overrun on your SD cards, and do you have a preferred type of SD card that you use?
I don't have a preferred type of SD card. I just try to get one that is on sale and one that has a lot of memory. So the ones that I have capability for 8 hours of recording. I actually have had them run out. So I just, when I'm doing multiple videos or multiple interviews back to back, I actually have had that happen in the middle of the interview. But you just have to make sure and watch the camera. I always watch it while it's recording, and on my camera there's a red dot on the screen when it's recording, and it also, when it runs out, the screen goes black and it says that the card is full. So when that happens, I just, I say, I'm sorry, the SD card ran out. I'm gonna have to change it, and whatever, and then I always have extras, so I just change it, and that only happened once or twice, but as long as you have backup empty cards that you can swap out, it's okay.
Yeah, and so on the further on the SD cards, do you know how many gigs? Can you tell us how many gigs you have for this 8-hour card that you're referring to?
I'm going to have to dig out my equipment and look at that, so I can look that up afterwards and send that information to you after, if that's okay, Hans.
Sure. No, that's great. Another question here: how do you share drafts of your videos with the researchers?
Sure. So so what I do in Adobe Premiere Pro, when I'm done editing a draft, I export the video to an H.264 format, which ends up being an MP4 video, and then I take that file and I put it in Dropbox, and I share the Dropbox link. I've seen some people upload it to YouTube and then make the YouTube video private, but I don't do that. I find it's a little too risky. I don't want to risk it being public by accident. So I usually just use Dropbox for sharing the drafts of the videos.
Okay. Another question about your role as KT manager. Do you work exclusively for NeuroDevNet, or do you have multiple contacts as a videographer?
I currently just do videos for NeuroDevNet researchers.
Okay. I've got a few other people who are typing. I'm not sure if there's, looks like there's another couple of questions on the way there. But, I think we are at our scheduled end, but if people are still interested, we'll be happy to stick around and chat for a few more minutes. And there, as we mentioned earlier, there will be materials on the LinkedIn page as well. So if you're not part of that, just send me an email and I'll be happy to add you. Another question: what are your preferred export settings for the final export?
So I usually, so as I mentioned before, I export in the H.264 format, but in terms of the settings, I usually do the maximum quality that's possible, and then that's the only setting that I adjust.
Okay. Another open-ended question: what is the biggest challenge that you face in KT video making?
Oh, the biggest challenge I think is having time to do it, because it takes so much time, and that's not my only job task. So just finding the time to be able to do it.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got a handful of thanks from a number of people, and unless there's a further question, I'll just watch the chat line for a minute there. But unless there's a further question, I'll say thank you very much, Annalise, for doing this today. I think people have found it very helpful.
Oh, thank you, guys.
The recording will be available. We'll probably post that on Monday or Tuesday at the latest, I would think, so that I know there were several people that couldn't make it today. So yeah, thank you to all who attended, and we will be in touch with you as well for the next webinar in terms of both topic and scheduling. If you have any ideas in the meantime, we are always happy to have those that input in terms of what we could focus on for the next time around.